Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed members of the press, dear colleagues, welcome to the presentation of the August inflation report. As usual, at today's conference, we will present current economic developments, our new macroeconomic projections, and monetary policy decisions adopted since the last report. At the very beginning, I would like to emphasize that since the previous report, first and foremost, inflation returned within the target bounds and inflation expectations fell further, enabling us to embark on monetary policy easing. This means that we have won our battle against inflation and that going ahead, it will move at levels consistent with our target, 3 plus minus 1.5%. In addition, as GDP growth in the first half of the year turned out to be faster than expected, we increased the economic growth projection for this year to 3.8%, anticipating further growth acceleration to 4 to 5% in the next 2 years. The recorded economic growth and preserved financial stability, coupled with the decline in the share of non-performing loans in total loans to below 3%, confirmed that we managed to provide both medium-term price stability and a soft landing with our appropriate monetary policy, which was tightened in the previous period continuously but at a gradual and moderate pace. Let me start with inflation, which is our main goal and a measure of success. As announced at the previous conference, but also almost a year and a half back, inflation returned within the target tolerance band of 3 plus minus 1.5% this May and continued to move within the band for another 2 months. Following its decline to 3.8% year-on-year in June, inflation rose to 4.3% in July, owing to a series of one-off price hikes. Let me cite bread, package delivery services, tolls, and the increase in the global prices of some primary agricultural commodities, which pushed up the prices of some of the products in Serbia too. And here I have to point out the example of coffee and cocoa. As the said price hikes remain in the calculation of the year-on-year inflation rate for a year, and as the growth in domestic demand since the beginning of the year turned out to be stronger than expected, we now project that inflation will decline at a somewhat slower pace in the coming period. Under the new central projection, inflation will continue to move within the target band in the next 2 years, which is our projection horizon. It will first slow down to around 4% at the end of this year and gradually approach the 3% target midpoint in the course of 2025. As in most other countries, core inflation has been higher than headline inflation since May and has stabilized at around 5% year-on-year in recent months. Nevertheless, according to our projection, core inflation too will slow down until the end of the year and approach headline inflation next year. Considering inflation's downward trajectory and its expected profile over the monetary policy horizon, in June we began and in July continued trimming the key policy rate by 25 basis points each to the level of 6%. At the August meeting, we kept the key policy rate on hold having in mind that the effects of past measures are yet to play out fully. Here I would like to stress that in the previous months we made monetary policy decisions with great caution, acknowledging all the risks, and that despite the relaxation, the monetary policy stance is still restrictive, which will contribute to keeping inflationary pressures low in the period ahead as well. Inflation expectations are an important factor of the restrictiveness of our monetary policy and at the same time a proof of its high credibility. Short-term expectations of the financial and corporate sectors have gone considerably down in the last year, and 1 year ahead expectations, according to the June survey of the financial sector, were lowered to 3.15, almost equalizing with medium-term expectations, which have been at the target midpoint for quite some time now. The decrease in short-term and anchored medium-term expectations directly contribute to lower inflation. The downward path of domestic inflation was also underpinned by the fall in imported inflation from its end 2022 peak. According to the projections of the relevant international institutions, euro area inflation will continue to decline, but its pace will be more gradual than expected, mostly due to a somewhat higher core inflation than anticipated. Assuming unfavorable geopolitical developments do not reflect significantly on global energy and primary commodity prices in the coming period either, the said factors should ensure medium-term inflation levels which are consistent with our target. Due to market expectations of the start of monetary policy accommodation by the National Bank of Serbia and the European Central Bank, the interest rates on dinar and euro loans to corporates and households have been on a moderate decline ever since the end of last year, and the same can be expected going forward in view of the implemented easing of monetary conditions in both Serbia and the euro area. Consistent with the easing of credit conditions and standards for dinar loans, the loan demand of both corporates and households increased, resulting in the acceleration of total lending activity growth to 4.7% year-on-year in June, with corporate loans rising by 4.2% and household by 4.9%. Increased dinar lending pushed up the dinarization of corporate and household receivables to 36.1% in June. Stepped-up lending also contributed to the lowering of the share of non-performing loans in total loans to the new low of 2.9%, which was maintained at close to 3% owing to the solid regulatory framework for banks and carefully combined and synchronized measures of monetary and macroprudential policy for the entire duration of the multiple crises we have faced. Owing to inflation slowdown, a rise in the real disposable income of households and corporates, and the intensification of the investment cycle, the acceleration of Serbia's real GDP growth from the second half of last year continued into the first half of this year, with the real GDP growth amounting to around 4.5% year-on-year. More specifically, according to the flash estimate of the Serbian Statistical Office, GDP growth measured 4.2% in the second quarter, driven by services, construction and manufacturing on the production side, and by higher private consumption and fixed investments on the consumption side. In quarterly terms and excluding the seasonal effect, GDP is estimated to have grown 0.7% in the second quarter, the growth being recorded for the seventh quarter in a row. Though external demand from the euro area is still subdued, it is recovering, as indicated by the 0.3% GDP growth in each of the first two quarters of the year, which should exert a positive effect on our exports and manufacturing output. Since GDP growth in the first half of the year exceeded our expectations, we raised our projection of economic growth for this year to 3.8% from the 3.5% projected in May. Similar expectations for economic growth for this year are shared by other relevant institutions, the International Monetary Fund and Consensus Economics, which place Serbia's growth among the highest in the region of Central, East and Southeast Europe. In the next 2 years, we expect to see further economic growth acceleration to the range of 4 to 5%. This will be underpinned by the rollout of investments under the Leap into the Future Serbia Expo 2027 program, reduced global inflationary pressures and more favorable financing conditions, reflecting the National Bank of Serbia's and the European Central Bank's start of monetary policy accommodation. Growth will be led by domestic demand, with positive contributions coming from all its components. Private consumption will expand on the back of a continued rise in employment and wages, primarily in the private sector, but without any major inflationary effects, because wage growth will also reflect increased productivity. An important factor of economic growth are fixed investments, which boost the potential output of our economy and should come close to 25% of GDP in the medium run. Private investment growth should be propelled by high FDI inflow, higher corporate profitability from the past years, and preserved investment confidence, as well as reduced global inflationary pressures and more favorable financing conditions. Investment growth will also be impacted by the implementation of public investments in transport, energy, and utility infrastructure. Trends in the current account of the balance of payments in the year to date were consistent with our expectations. We thus kept the projection of the current account deficit share in GDP for this year at around 4%. Having in mind the accelerated implementation of the investment cycle, this share is anticipated at around 5% of GDP over the next 2 years, which in our estimate, as well as that of the International Monetary Fund, is within the boundaries of external sustainability. As we expected, in the first 6 months of the year, goods and services exports were some 4% higher than in the same period of 2023, driven primarily by the growing exports of manufacturing and mining as a result of past investments, and of agricultural products following a good agricultural season last year. Goods and services imports grew faster in the same period at around 5% year-on-year, mostly due to higher imports of equipment and intermediate goods for the needs of the investment cycle. Given the outturns in the first half of the year, a current account deficit of 1.2 billion euros or 3.4% of GDP, and an inflow of foreign direct investments of over 2.3 billion euros or 2.8 billion euros if preliminary July data are included. We can say that for a whole decade now, the current account deficit has been fully covered by the most desirable category of foreign capital inflows, and this trend is projected to continue going forward. A capital inflow was also generated by the issue of 10-year euro bonds in the international market worth $1.5 billion, which boosted the country's FX reserves to 28.1 billion euros at end July. Nicola will tell you more about it later on. The rise in foreign exchange reserves also resulted from the National Bank of Serbia's interventions in the foreign exchange market. In order to maintain relative stability of the exchange rate of the dinar against the euro amid prevailing appreciation pressures, during the 7 months of 2024, we acted as the net buyer of foreign currency in the amount of 1.56 billion euros or 1.8 billion euros if today is included. At the same time, I want to stress that the Republic of Serbia did not issue Eurobonds because of any financing difficulties, but in order to raise funds for the implementation of the green agenda and socially responsible projects. In view of the persisting uncertainty in the international markets, the issue of Serbia's 10-year ESG bonds may be characterized as highly successful. This is confirmed by the high investor demand for these bonds and reduced costs of borrowing during the auction, as well as by the fact that after the hedging transaction, the terms of borrowing in euros at 4.75% turned out more favorable even when compared to some countries in the region with an investment-grade rating. In the year to date, fiscal trends have outperformed the expectations. Contributing factors were higher than expected revenues, partly owing to greater corporate profitability in the previous year, which came at 972 billion dinars in 2023, recording a 12% increase on the year before. On a consolidated basis, the first half of 2024 saw a surplus of 33 billion dinars, or 0.8% of GDP, while a deficit of 2.2% of GDP is planned at the annual level. General government public debt as a share of GDP came at 50.3% in June, down by 2 percentage points compared to end 2023. In the National Bank of Serbia's estimate, the fiscal impulse in this period will be almost neutral, meaning that fiscal policy measures should not exert inflationary pressure, while investment in the modernization of public infrastructure will also boost the country's potential output. Recent macroeconomic movements at home and abating external inflationary pressures, along with a more favorable global growth outlook and Serbia's proven resilience to adverse geopolitical developments, indicate that the most turbulent period of economic challenges is behind us and that we managed to weather through it while preserving macroeconomic stability and strengthening resilience to external shocks. However, Though currently less pronounced, the risks to our macroeconomic projections still mandate caution in the conduct of monetary policy. Uncertainty surrounding the inflation and GDP projections still largely stems from geopolitical relations and the global growth outlook, as well as their impact on global prices of energy and other primary commodities. To a certain extent, the risks also relate to the persistence of core inflation on a global level and the duration of tight monetary policies of leading central banks. The risks to the projection also stem from the pace of growth of domestic demand and the outcome of the domestic and global agricultural season. Overall, the risks to inflation and GDP growth projections for this and the next year are judged to be balanced, that is, symmetric. In this context, I would like to underscore that in making our future monetary policy decisions, we will follow a meeting-by-meeting approach, taking into account the speed of inflation slowdown and the movement of its key factors, while also taking care about the effects on financial stability and economic growth. We tightened monetary conditions carefully and cautiously, and we will apply the same principle of caution in easing them. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, considering that the last week marked 12 years since I took the helm of the National Bank of Serbia, I will conclude my introductory speech with a brief overview of that period, probably the most turbulent and challenging one in recent history for economic policy makers, not only in Serbia, but worldwide. Let me remind you that in the past 4 years alone, we faced the coronavirus pandemic, unprecedented economic lockdowns, energy crisis, war in Ukraine and the Middle East. Though the period before that was not bereft of challenges either. Brexit occurred, as well as the Greek bank crisis. It fills me with special pride that I served as governor in this period, and that even in such circumstances, medium-term price and financial stability and the relative exchange rate stability have been preserved. As a result of the responsible conduct of economic policy, and primarily of synchronized actions of monetary and fiscal authorities as two hands of the same body, fiscal and external imbalances were reduced, a favorable growth outlook of our economy and Serbia's status as a desirable investment destination were preserved, and the country's resilience to external challenges was strengthened. Owing to that, last week, Fitch and in April Standard & Poor's improved Serbia's outlook for credit rating, which is currently at BB+, from stable to positive, placing us a mere half a step away from investment grade. I will use this opportunity to thank President Aleksandar Vučić for entrusting me with the leadership of the National Bank of Serbia for the next 6 years. I will also use this opportunity to thank my associates for their support. And I hope that in the coming period as well, the National Bank of Serbia will continue to be a synonym for stability, continuity, and consistency in achieving goals to the benefit of the state, the economy, and our citizens. In the remainder of the conference, I will give the floor to Savo Jakovljević, General Manager of the Economic Research and Statistics Department, who will give a more detailed overview of our projections. And after that, Aleksandar Tomin will speak more about GDP growth and upward revision of our economic growth projection. After that, Mirjana Miletić will give you more details on inflation profile, and finally Nikola Dragašević will give you more details about the issue of our Eurobonds. Thank you for your attention. Savo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Governor. I would now like to elaborate on our new projections and assumptions that underpin these projections. And we also have the major risk that emanates from the international environment, and the impact is the strongest in this regard. As for the risks, as the Governor said, we have geopolitical tensions that are still present. We also have new tensions springing up. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine is going on, which is an upside risk to oil prices and the prices of raw materials used for the production of other products as well. This influences the global economy, but compared to what we had in the previous projections, the global economy is recovering faster than we expected, and in this regard we have a positive influence, although we still have restrictive monetary conditions in most central banks. The process of trimming key rates is being slower than expected at the start of the year. If we take, for example, the ECB and the Fed, the ECB cut its key rate only once. The Fed hasn't done that so far. Market expectations are such that the Fed will do that in September, but global monetary conditions are still being restrictive. As for GDP of our major trade partners, which is an important input for our manufacturing and our exports, the projection for the euro area is that it will grow between 0.7 and 0.9. So these are the projections of all the relevant institutions, the ECB, the IMF, and we also took into account this figure in our projections. We also expect inflation to continue to slow down globally, owing to lower global oil prices if we compare this level with the level of the last year, and if we take into account cost push pressures as well concerning raw materials and inputs as well. So we included all these factors when making our projection. After the July hike of inflation to 4.3, we expect inflation to decline until the end of the year. Until the end of the year, it could stand at 4%, and it will decline later on and approach the 3% midpoint in the third quarter of 2025. So what influenced this inflation hike in July? So these are the one-off price hikes of some products. We have seen that in the national markets we talk a lot about coffee and cocoa. So these are the products used in the production of many products in the confectionery industry, and a large number of manufacturing products as well, which impacts the prices of in the domestic market. So we also saw some price hikes that were one-off but remain in the inflation calculation for 1 year. That is in year-on-year inflation, which is why our projection until the end of the year is slightly higher than we had in May, but the trajectory is the same. The downward trend is the same. We expect it to continue, and we expect inflation to approach the 3% midpoint in 2025. As for inflation components, when it comes to non-food products and services, where many of these services come from imports, we expect the greatest contribution to lower inflation. So in this group of products, the contribution to inflation in the fourth quarter of this year is expected of 2.2 percentage points, and in the next year it will fall to 1.4 from these products. only, the inflation will decline by around 1.8 percentage points. As for food prices, they are on a good trend. What we emphasized in May, we in June saw for the first time that the entire group of food products of non-alcoholic beverages had a negative growth of minus 0.1%. So as for fruit and vegetable prices, they're in line with our projection, and this is what we also highlighted at the last presentation. With the new crops, these prices declined by around 15-16% compared to 1 year ago, and these prices will continue to contribute to lower inflation, that is, to a reduction in inflation. Weather conditions may impact this wave, that is, this wave of high temperatures may have an impact, but within 1 year, fruit and vegetable prices will give a neutral contribution over the next year. As for other movements, administered prices will increase less than last year. There were some comments concerning electricity and natural gas prices in the press. In the year-on-year calculation, those are the last year's price hikes. We expect no hikes for this year. As for domestic demand, it has its contribution, and according to our estimate, when it comes real wages in the private sector will rise in line with productivity growth, and outlays for wages in the public sector will rise in line with fiscal rules. So the contribution of domestic demand will be neutral in the projection horizon. When it comes to wages, and the living standard, inflation growth, all this was analyzed in the media. There's often the thesis that the inflation growth somehow annulled the increase in wage and pension growth. The data are clear and official. We only wanted to highlight all this. If we observe the period from 2021 to date, when we saw inflation's growth due to global factors beyond our control, we had to deal with them. That is, we had to ease those factors. In 2021, the average inflation rate was 4.1%. Net wage growth was 9.6%. In 2022, 11.9% inflation, 13.8% average wage. In 2023, 20.1% inflation and 14.8% wage. And this year, 5.3% inflation and 15.2% wage growth. And this led to the fact that the coverage of the average basket, consumer basket, by the average wage has been going up during all these years, despite all the external challenges, reaching the maximum levels of 93.5%, and the coverage of minimum basket by minimum wage is 88.9%. And all this time, the wage and pension growth is based on productivity growth, and there were no major inflationary pressures on this account. As for pensions, the trends are similar. In 21, 5.8%. In 22, pensions grew a bit lower than inflation. And inflation was 11.9%. In 23, this pension growth was 21.9% and inflation was 12.1%. And in the 5 months of this year, pensions went up by 21% and inflation went up by 5.3%. Please take a photo of these slides because we want to avoid wrong interpretations and misconceptions. So these figures are not contained in the inflation report. We just wanted to emphasize all this because the public interprets some data in a wrong way, because some say that inflation has eaten up the wage growth. Or we can also send these slides to you if you wish. Alexander Tomin. Thank you. As the governor said, the real GDP growth projection was revised up from 3.5 to 3.8%, owing primarily to more favorable than expected movements in the first half of this year. On the other hand, the growth projection for 2025 and 26 has been kept unchanged at 4 to 5. That is, we expect acceleration of GDP to this range. When it comes to the growth composition for this year and the years beyond, it is unchanged compared to the May projection. And on the production side, we expect the growth to be led by service sectors primarily, on account of further positive trends in the labour market, that is an increase in wages and employment, which lead to higher disposable income. In addition to service sectors, we also projected continuation and mild acceleration of growth in production sectors, primarily construction, and in manufacturing as well, where we expect the trend of the expansion of the existing capacities and the activation of new ones to continue in line with the investment inflow. When it comes to on the expenditure side, the growth should be led primarily by domestic demand, and within domestic demand by personal consumption. Personal consumption will be pushed up by greater disposable income, owing to the expected continued growth in wages and employment, a slowdown in inflation as well, including slight easing of monetary policies by the NBS and the ECB. In addition to personal consumption, the growth will be underpinned by a rise in gross fixed investment, where we expect positive trends in regard to the preserved investment confidence, favorable growth outlook of our economy for this year and the period ahead, in view of the resilience to external shocks over the past years, and in regard to the implementation of projects within the Expo 2027 program, which should contribute to a rise in government, that is, public investment. When it comes to external developments, we took into account the new investment cycle, and we projected a somewhat faster real growth in exports compared to imports. We expect a further increase in exports at a rate of around 5% annually, owing to the continued robust inflow of FDI and an increase in our export capacities on this account, on account of the gradual, as well as on account of the gradual rebound of domestic demand. As I said, we also took into account a higher need for the imports of intermediate goods for the new investment cycle, which should result in somewhat stronger dynamics of exports compared to imports, and negative contribution of net exports to GDP for this year and the years beyond.
In the remainder of the conference, we will give more information about the movement of food prices in the domestic market. We emphasized repeatedly in the prior period that in the past 2 years, the key driver of inflation growth were food prices, which exhibited similar dynamics similar to those in other countries, though the impact of food prices on inflation inflation in Serbia was stronger than in the euro area due to the fact that food has a much greater share of 32% in the consumer basket, whereas in the euro area this share equals on average 20%. When inflation was at its peak in March 2023, as much as 50% of year-on-year inflation was attributable to food prices. Since April last year, food prices have been on a strong downward trajectory. And since February this year, food prices recorded smaller year-on-year growth rates than headline inflation, though in June the entire category of food was at an even slightly lower level than a year ago. At previous press conferences, you used to ask us whether food prices could fall down, and we said at the time that we expect a major slowdown in food price growth, and we also said that if the supply turns out good in the market, it is possible that food prices will decline too, and this is what actually happened. In the meantime, we received July data on inflation, and food price growth turned out to be zero. So food prices practically stagnated relative to June, though due to the low last year's base, in year-on-year terms, food prices returned to the positive territory and their year-on-year growth equaled 1.4%. But this is really small growth, though vegetable prices are still declining, and in July, vegetable prices declined by 14% relative to July last year. When it comes to expectations for the coming period, overall cost-push pressures in food production remain low, and the drop in global cereal prices has been a major contributor to the slowdown in food price growth in the prior period. These prices did grow from February to May this year, primarily because of the uncertainty regarding the character of the agricultural season, both in Europe and in Latin America. But as this uncertainty has dissipated, these prices have stabilized, and according to projections of the relevant international institutions and according to futures, the prices of primary agricultural commodities, wheat, corn, soybean, will be even lower than at the end of last year, whereas next year they should record moderate growth. Cost-push pressures on food prices have abated, and this is confirmed that in the 6 months of this year, even including July, so in the 7 months of this year, food price growth in the domestic market amounted to mere 1.8%, whereas in the same period, cumulative growth in the 6 months last year equaled 10.7%. A similar tendency is recorded in other countries too, so the food price growth slowed down significantly in year-on-year terms, but compared to Serbia, stronger growth when it comes to food prices has been recorded in Poland, Croatia, Romania, North Macedonia. According to our projections, food prices should reduce their contribution to headline inflation from around 1 percentage point this year to 0.7 percentage points next year, and here we exclude fruit and vegetable prices that will follow a somewhat different dynamics because they're recording a year-on-year decline now, while next year, assuming an average agricultural season, it is possible that by the end of next year, they will provide a mildly positive contribution. So until February and March, they should stay in the negative territory, and after that, they should provide a mildly positive contribution to inflation. To conclude, when it comes to food prices, we do not expect any major inflationary pressures in the coming period, of course, provided there are no major shocks in the international environment, such as drought, that would affect the character of the domestic and global agricultural season. Thank you, Governor. The Governor already mentioned in her introductory speech the Eurobonds, which led to the increase in foreign exchange reserves in June. So on the 5th of June, the Republic of Serbia issued Eurobonds in US dollars in the amount of $1.75 billion, and immediately thereafter it concluded a hedging transaction which helped us protect from foreign exchange risk, given that we cannot impact the movements of the euro against the dollar. So we converted our liabilities from dollars into euros. And second thing, we managed to make some savings, as direct financing in the euro was by 1 percentage point more expensive than this combination, borrowing in dollars and then converting liabilities into euros. The Governor said that the issue of these Eurobonds was rather successful, and we will give you several indicators corroborating this statement. We have chosen the right timing to tap the international market, and several activities preceded the issue itself. These were the activities of the representatives of the Ministry of Finance and the National Bank of Serbia. We waited for an opportune moment. We waited for the fall in interest rates. We had this benchmark sovereign bond in the U.S. Treasury, whose rate declined by 30 basis points, that is by 0.3 percentage points. And by selecting the right timing, we made huge savings. We issued the Eurobond 1 year ahead of the ECB's rate-setting meeting, and the markets expected that this meeting will mark the start of monetary policy easing, which actually happened. So the global risk premium declined, and we made additional savings in the cost of financing. Another thing happened at the auction itself, and it resulted from a series of activities implemented by the MBS and the Ministry of Finance before the issue, and we had talks with over 50 international investors into Serbian bonds. We presented to them macroeconomic, fiscal and monetary developments. We presented the Republic of Serbia's international position and how international financial institutions and credit rating agencies see us. The Governor emphasized in her introductory speech that in April and several days ago we received information about the increase in our rating outlook, and this is something investors recognized even before the decisions of these rating agencies. So during the auction, the cost of financing was reduced by 40 basis points, or by 0.4 percentage points. So we started from 240 basis points above the benchmark security and ended 200 basis points above the U.S. Treasuries. When we compare this decrease achieved during the auction, it was stronger than for countries in the region, which equaled somewhat more than 30 basis points. So Serbia made savings of 40 basis points, and the average of other countries in the region was around 30 basis points, slightly more. When you issue Euro bonds, on each issue of Euro bonds, investors require new issue premium, or NIP, which is almost as a rule positive, but in this case it was even negative. It is estimated at around 5 basis points. And what does this mean? This means that investors usually require that the yield rate on new securities is above the rate at which these bonds are traded in the market. And this is quite customary because they want to make more earnings, but they accepted to invest into Serbian bonds at a lower yield rates, which is, of course, more favorable for Serbia. But in order to ensure this, we had to boost the demand for these bonds, and the demand equaled $6.5 billion US, which means it was 4.5 times higher than the planned amount of sale of $1.5 billion. After the hedging transaction mentioned by the governor in her introductory speech, the borrowing rate on euro borrowing equaled 4.75%, and it was lower than the rate at which Romania, who is a member of the European Union and who has an investment-grade rating towards which we aspire as well. And we hope that in a year we will manage to realize this, because according to Standard & Poor's, we are for the third time at a half a step away from that step. The auction was rather successful, and we have to look at the level of interest rates. We are now operating in an environment of globally elevated interest rates. So if Germany issued its 10-year euro bonds at minus 1.5 percentage points at negative yield rates and is now borrowing at the rate of 2%, of 2.5% above that level, we have to see what is the difference in yield rates in Serbian bonds relative to those benchmark securities. When talking about the risk premium, that is the difference in the cost of borrowing, it has been narrowed down significantly in the past 6 to 7 months. In October 2023, when it comes to German bonds, it equaled 4 percentage points, and at end May it decreased to 2.5 percentage points. So savings have been made from this aspect as well. And this is one of the arguments that speak in favor of the right timing, of waiting for the right timing to tap the international market. An additional piece of data is that this is the 8th issue of Eurobonds of the Republic of Serbia. The first issue took place in June 2019. 3 issues were in euros and 4 issues were in the US dollar, and each time we carried out a hedging transaction in order to protect from the exchange rate risk, because we cannot impact the movement of other currencies' exchange rates. And the second thing is the savings that we have made. It is more favorable to issue bonds in US dollars and then convert them into euros than issue the bonds in euros in the first place. The difference was 4 percentage points, and these are the savings that we have made.
If you have any questions, we stand at your disposal. Euronews. The question for the governor. You announced in the Assembly, and the President also talked about amendments to the law on capping interest rates. So has the public debate started? Can you give us some details about it? So what will the NBS do about it? And the second question concerns what the Prime Minister said. For the first 100 days, he talked about capping margins in production chains. Will that impact the government in general? So the NBS submitted data on the level of margins, and what are the impacts on this? And the third question, the GDP will grow to 5% if lithium is being excavated in the next 2 years. So what will be the figures? So the President and the Prime Minister talked about the share of money, that is about the money that could be obtained from the production. Would that impact GDP growth? Thank you. Thank you, Marco. When it comes to the announcement about amendments, that is about the new law on the protection of financial services consumers. I believe that you already know what the practice of the NBS is like. We don't talk about it in the public. Republic, we first have to harmonize and align all elements with those who will bear the burden of those changes and those who will benefit from such a law. I'm talking about banks. As the NBS, on Monday we sent to all banks a draft solution, and we expect from each bank to give its statement about these proposed changes. We calculated very seriously the effects per each individual bank, and this will concern the capping of rates on housing loans, which will come into force by the end of this year, when this current temporary measure expires. We dealt with the most expensive bank products, rates on overdrafts, and we also wish to limit interest rates on cash and on-purpose loans. Many have been talking about it in the public. Many are somehow crying over the banks and about the market economy that we purportedly meddle with. But when it comes to the capping of the interest on overdrafts, this is based on European standards, and I don't know why people do not want to mention this. And we, as the National Bank, want to take into account all the possible aspects. So we are not bound by many rules currently, the rules that are applicable in the EU. But if they are favorable for our citizens, why not? When the law on contracts and torts said that when this interest charging should not be excessive, so we have a similar formulation here. So excessive, this should not be usury, but the law should be based on these European standards, because this will be defined by the law. This should not be overly strict and too rigidly defined, because any change to circumstances would imply a change in the law. But when analyzing solutions, we first talk to banks, and then we will have a public debate. I believe this term is being used in a wrong way. It's not a public hearing when we want to adopt a completely new law. I believe expectations were such, but this was not justified. We will not talk interested groups. Under public debate, we imply a public announcement of the draft law, and then we will talk to the banks, and the entire public will be able to state their opinions about the changes. So we will talk about these details once we reach a consensus with banks, and then we will have the public debate that it will be available to others as well. I wish to say that it is a law that should achieve a win-win situation, so no one should be a loser and everyone should be a winner. And I believe that our solutions are exactly such. They have been formulated in such a way that it has been a win-win situation, and financial stability will be further reinforced with this law. If we talk about 2.9% of NPLs at the times of the crisis, and when we have inflationary movements in the world and at home, you can understand that this is one of the best indicators of the stability and the capacity of banks to charge their loans from clients, and clients are being able to repay their obligations. But as inflation gives the main directive, but this target should not jeopardize economic growth, that is the living standard of citizens. It should not be misaligned with the economic policy of the government, because new jobs, new wages and new employment enable this new borrowing and regular repayment of loans, which means sustainable development. So this is the consistency of our measures and the synchronicity between fiscal and monetary policies. The extent to which banks have understood our message is indicated by the fact that they also took into account a temporary measure on capping interest rates on housing loans. Those rates were variable and they accepted this measure, and we have seen the effects of this measure, which speaks volumes about their awareness that they depend on clients. This is not policing of the regulator or any enforced action, so no one should cry over the destiny of banks. This is a joint agreement about further sustainable functioning. When it comes to the margins, I would not like to talk about the details because we are waiting for the study being developed by the Competition Protection Agency, and in the meantime we have regular contacts with trade chains. Many were defending, and the trade chains were thankful to us because we opened this issue, because on the way to the trade chains, sometimes or often we have unjustified justified build-up of prices up to the retail sale. But I'm happy about the initiative launched by Mr. Vučević, the Prime Minister. He opened this initiative at the GDP meeting, and the NBS will give its full contribution to resolving this problem, because we don't want any cartel agreements, or we don't want monopoly positions, particularly on those products which are important for the living standard of citizens, from food to household cleaning products. But we will be a part of the working group that the President of the government is setting up, and you will be informed about the results of these activities. You know that I'm a conservative woman, but I also respect the rules of the procedure, and you can rest assured that the NBS will contribute to this process with its analysis. And I'm also thankful for your question about the lithium. Although you may think that I will answer to your question in my way, but I will give you an essential answer to your question. At the time when we were carrying out fiscal consolidation, the IMF did not expect that our fiscal consolidation, that is the adjustment of earning with spending of the government, will be ended with growth. And we did end that year and that period with growth, and owing to this, Serbia was really a bright spot when it comes to cooperation with the IMF, not because it blindly followed anyone's instructions, but because we were adopting measures. Of course, we know who put at risk his own political future. That was Mr. Vučić, who was the president of the government at a time with the help of the central bank as well, which already reduced the inflation to the level of 2.2%, and it enabled the implementation of those measures. And we showed that we can do even what is impossible. Everything is possible when you're committed to your work and you want to achieve a result, because you're aware that these are the activities where you don't have an internship period, you're not exercising how to run the state, because you have to prove that you're worthy of the trust that you have put into citizens. So financial stability is underpinned by political stability. It would not have been possible for us to achieve the current results had it not been for political stability in Serbia. And it was not easy to maintain political stability. No matter how people say that the standard of living has fallen and that we live in a worse manner, there is no other measure but the measure of inflation and the data on FX reserves and the number of votes won at parliamentary and other elections. So we should not disregard this. When we talk about lithium, we learned in the elementary school what we learn first about a country, what is its service, its surface borders, citizens, and its natural resources as well. So what are the mining resources of a country as its potential? So who forgot about it? Let us remember. So why natural resources were called potentials? The intelligence of each of us is a potential. If we translate it into knowledge and education, we have translated the potential into the possibility of creating something and working on something. But neither intelligence nor knowledge are by themselves useful or a benefit. You have dark intelligence and you also have knowledge which is not put in favor of a better living standard of people. Who chooses and decides on whether we will turn the potentials into concrete GDP growth? Those who got the trust, who won the trust, and who is ready to put at risk his political future and to put this reputation at the test, because he will put one of the rare natural resources into the function of the development of this country. So what is the difference? The difference is not selling a raw material. I graduated from the Faculty of Economics. You who are economists, many of you are, you know very well the elementary rules of international trade and the highest level of processing, which enable each country to earn the most by ensuring that it does not sell raw material, but that it has some gains from these resources. I'm convinced that Serbia should not miss its chance. It's just like saying, I'm intelligent, but I don't want to study. I'm intelligent, but I don't want to learn and to gain concrete knowledge and apply it and to be employed at a high position to achieve some scientific achievements. It need not be an important scientific contribution, but I will come to my work regularly and I will give my contribution by entering into the no-cost projection and thus ensure a predictable rise in inflation to the central bank and enable the management of the central bank to make appropriate decisions. So, I never tried to be liked by anyone. And it was always more important for me what I'm saying than what I look like. And whether any title in your media will be based on the principle, if it bleeds, it leads, you know what it means. If you show a scene where you have violence, blood, and so on, your rating will go up. This can apply to the media, to the television. This does not apply to the central bank and the responsible government. We are led by what is good and by in terms of the effects that should be taken into account and what are the effects that are taken into account in the world. This also speaks in favor of lithium as a chance for Serbia. I believe that each potential should be translated into a real possibility. Of course, as globalization has brought some effects that must be remedied, but we cannot go 2 steps back, regardless of the current closing of all the economies where each country believes that America should be first, Germany first, France first. Serbia also wants to be first. Regardless of putting the bullets in your pockets, and when everyone looks, even in the EU, at how much he gives and how much he gets, globalization is irreversible in terms of interdependencies, in terms of the the interdependencies when it comes to the use of raw materials and production, and we will not wait for the time. I will not quote Krešimir Mišek, for example. He says, "Forget the world that you knew about. It does not exist any longer. You may love nature, peace, quietness, but when you come to Podgorica, you're not able to feel the smell of beautiful trees. You feel the smell of gasoline. There is increasingly less greenery, and this is what civilization brings with it. So a cure that cures has some side effects that should be taken into account. You're taking an antibiotic, but you also have to use a Boulardi so as to preserve your digestion flora. So lithium is a chance, and it will significantly contribute to GDP growth, which does not mean we should enter this without analysis and heedlessly, but we need to engage professionals and all those who know sufficiently about it, but also have professional dignity and honor to say the truth. Why do I mention professional honor? Sometimes people in Serbia say the Central Bank in Serbia has delayed its monetary policy measures. They forget that in November 2021 we started to tighten monetary conditions before we used our K policy rate, but somebody only takes into account the moment when we started to lower the K policy rate. You cannot annul the fact that we were tightening monetary conditions much before, and that through all the crises, including the energy crisis and the COVID crisis, we weathered all these crises in such a way that we had the lowest decline in GDP, and 3 months before everyone, we returned to the pre-COVID state in terms of growth. You can forget about it, but these are the facts. And in the same way, I wish to say the following. So what I'm worried about is that people read increasingly less, and their louder voices, their louder half-truths when it comes to the development of Serbia. Unfortunately, I have knowledge, I have learned that many wish to suppress Serbia and to suppress its growth. And you can assume what my sources are. Of course, through financial flows, you can see everything very easily. And I'm worried slightly that some people who really care, because they have such targeted information about the damage that may be inflicted by the lithium exploitation, they very skillfully abuse this information and manipulate the fears instead of showing the real data. And the real data are such that close to hundreds of millions of euros will enter this country for training and the engagement of those who are to change the critical awareness and to learn how to fight against the current regimes. I'm not imparting to you false information. You have very interesting domains registered in Niš, where we have all suspicious domains. I know about it because of all the hacking attacks on the NBS. Some organizations are being registered there, and they invite young people, and they offer 13,000 dinars to them. They tell them the stories about how to develop their critical awareness and how to fight against the current regime. The current topic is lithium. I don't know what the following topics will be. I know how much risk I take by saying this, but my dear friends, I experienced the year 2000. And I will repeat this story for $6 million of the caregiving fund of the World Bank. We had $6 million, so the government was changed, not by means of the voting results, because the assembly was attacked. So for $6 million, these were not billions. 4.4 went to consultancy services to people who gave us this assistance. For being big banks were closed in the country under the principle kill the creditor and you have no debt. But privatization was carried out in the real sector also for $6 million of the assistance of the World Bank when we had the setting up of the privatization agency and all the other procedures, and the privatization encompassed the most important companies in Serbia, because I was the Minister of the Ownership Transformation at the time from 1998 to 2000, and this list of enterprises was in my hands. And I also had in my hands the pre-contract with the French company buying the Beocin cement factory. And in those negotiations, before the war, before the bombing, before the NATO bombing, each lot was specified about the exploitation of clinker used for the production of cement in the Beocin plant. And also a compensation fee was stipulated, that is the mining fee for this clinker. For those of you who have forgotten about it, the cement price was regulated and the government defined the upper limit of it. The condition of the Lafarge, who was to arrive in the country, and RMC, the British company, so they were the negotiators. Bruce Latton was from RMC. I negotiated with them personally. They asked that the cement price should be released. Serbia was under sanctions and many forgot about it. So the shares for the purchase of the Beocin plant were to be deposited on the escrow account, and my proposal was that just as a foreign buyer invests money from abroad in Serbia, so the shares from the escrow account should be released in such a way, proportionately. And the fee should be stipulated precisely as well. I have this pre-contract. Some opposition MPs were defending this pre-contract later on. So what happened? Somebody didn't like the price and this condition. Professor Mirko Vasiljevic remembers it, a professor from the Faculty of Economics. He congratulated me on my solution because I was the minister at the time. But somebody wanted to, by selling cement in Serbia at the then, so the price was to be released. Somebody wanted to make profit and to buy with this profit the Beocin shares. So this was done after the NATO bombing and the change of the government. And do I need to make any conclusions? now and to make any analogies with the current circumstances, Yadarit is a chance of Serbia, was a chance of Serbia in a previous election cycles, and I was silent about it. So why is it a problem now, and why some people say that they have the possibility to use the cheaper conditions? I'm referring to overall exploitation conditions. Why somebody expects that with the change of the government they could get the exploitation of Jadar. So that's why we have training sessions, we have numerous organizations and associations without accounts, and which open and close their accounts, change their representatives, and train young people in Serbia about how to change the regime. I said this, and you can. I'm just talking about the public data. If the foreign press writes that for Serbia, Jadarit is oil and something that can really contribute a lot to Serbia's development, and somebody else connects this with Alexander Vučić and his chance to stay on power for a long time. So these are political games, and nobody should turn a blind eye to it. And I don't have the right to it because I don't want to see again the same scenario unfolding as it unfolded in 2000 when we saw the closing of plants, the loss of jobs, court proceedings, court disputes, the fee of 2% with the success in privatization. If you bring somebody, when privatization fails, the government is paying damages, and we are paying those damages until this very day. My age is my advantage. My age is not my burden, and all the knowledge that I have is very useful and interesting for all those who want to hear. And there are many of those who are familiar with this. Some do not know anything about it, but we should not allow the same things to happen again. And I will now open another topic as well. Last week, somebody started talking about my photo when we were marking the 140th anniversary of the National Bank of Serbia. I didn't see this. I'm a Serbian nationalist, and I don't hate anyone. I love all the good and intelligent people. I like to watch my telecom. Half of my heart is in telecom. My younger daughter said to me, "Did you see that they're carrying your photo?" And asking whether this is you in the photo. Just look at my WhatsApp status. The te fabula narrator. This is Horatio's maxim that says, the story talks about you. That was my motto for the 140th anniversary of the National Bank. I have been elected for the third time as the governor. I'm grateful to God. God was really bountiful. It bestowed on me so many gifts, starting from my looks, my family, my associates. I don't like static operations, and I believe somebody's soul is the most important thing and the most beautiful thing. But this speaks volumes about those who opened this issue. And do you know why Horatio said this famous sentence? The story talks about you. He said it because of Tantalus, and I know that many of you have forgotten about this legend, and many of us use the expression Tantalus's torments, and I will use this opportunity to say what these torments are. He was a spoiled favorite of the gods, and he wanted wanted to have more than he had, and he had everything. And the gods punished him by submerging him into the water up to his chin, and whenever he wanted to drink a bit of water, the water receded. Above him was a branch with fruits, and whenever he wanted to pick up fruit, it just receded, and he stayed hungry. He remained hungry. Above him was a rock as a threat that it will fall on his head. So Tantalus's torments became a symbol for being brutish, and it is synonymous with somebody who is not satisfied with what he has. And is the legend of the Tantalus connected with the story about the lithium? You can make your own conclusions. I apologize for being too long, but you're used to me. That is me.
The Ministry of Trade, the National Bank of Serbia, the Ministry of Finance, the Competition Protection Commission. What is the intelligence service doing in all this story about margins? Why doesn't the reduction in margins reflect on actual movements? I haven't quite understood your question. I don't know why did you say that there are no margins here and that they should be here. I told you that a task force is forced, and we talked about it based on publicly available reports of financial companies. At the time, we were waiting for the Lidl's report, because in Germany and all other countries where they operate, they submit their financial statements a bit later. And we stand behind the data that we have. But in the talks, and I repeat this because of you, in our discussions with retail chains, we realized that these retail margins are not only a part of their operations, but the price from the producer to the retailer is being built upon between intermediaries. And we could elaborate on this, but in order to elaborate on this, we have to use data that are about to arrive. And retail chains do not deprive us of any single data, because they know we use these data with the best of intentions and in the interest of us all. But we don't want to speak in advance about something that should be first talked about by the Competition for the Protection of Committee for the Protection of Competition or the Ministry of Finance. But I never heard about a five-fold higher margins. No, we said that prices in the region are higher than in Serbia, and I spoke about the problems at the level of some of operating rules or non-tax barriers, are because nobody tackled these barriers and problems. And now we are planning to do that. I don't know why you are mentioning the intelligence service when it comes to margins, because no one ever mentioned the intelligence service nor planned for the intelligence service to be involved. I don't know why are you mentioning it. No, I have never heard about this before, and I was at the GDP Council meeting, and I keep abreast of the meetings of those I cooperate with and I work with. But once we have the true and the right information, we will be able to speak about it. To tell you the truth, without realizing the whole information, we can give a false statement. When it comes to coffee, I made some inquiries, and the price of the Atlantic Group coffee, I realized that they have a different methodology, and there were no other buyers, and the methodology of the calculation is different. They monitor the share of espresso, of filter coffee, of roast coffee, and you know what my favorite coffee is a mere 40%. So let us leave the institutions to present their analysis, why they approved, and say why they approved some transaction, and then consider it. Because I'm quite sure that people who know how to do their job are in charge of this. And they do not fear anyone, because I wasn't afraid of anyone when I closed down 4 banks. I closed these banks because their balances were false, because their operations were not sustainable, they had fictitious collaterals, and so on. I have this type of courage and professional integrity, and I expect the same professional integrity from all actors, and I'm asking you only to be patient, because all of us are in our positions, and so are the buyers in the shops. We are the actors most interested in returning inflation to the target midpoint. We are now within the target, but we want the inflation to be at the target midpoint. But as a buyer, I'm also interested in buying goods in Serbia at prices that are not unreasonably higher than in the region. As a country with investment grade, as a country that has record a high inflow of foreign direct inflows, why would products cost more in our country than in other countries? So when we get the first results about this, the public will be duly informed in the way that I said. The task force has been formed. We will give our contribution, and we'll inform you about it in due time. Another question. Good day. I would like to congratulate you on your reappointment. My first question would be, could you tell us something about the methodology of the new law? Would it be concern capping the nominal increase in interest rates? And when it comes to the current account overdrafts, I think that the percentage of people entering it is much smaller. When it comes to banks, I don't know whether you noticed that some new proposals on reducing interest rates on savings deposits have been made. They want to reduce interest rates from 5% to 2%. And when it comes to euro deposits, the decrease is even sharper. What is the message here? Is it much better to invest money into buying a car than to put money on a deposit with banks? Can we see a new source of growth here, because savings definitely do not pay off? When it comes to the price of gold, it is definitely rising, but investing into gold is not for everybody. Thank you for your congratulations and for your questions. 2 of your questions are particularly interesting. Investment opportunities and the drop in interest rates on savings. The National Bank of Serbia has been striving all the while not to allow the introduction of negative interest rates, which would be an excuse for lowering the rates on savings deposits. We have really fought very much, not with great success, but we think that this fight should be continued, especially at this point when we want the discrepancy between low interest rates on savings deposits and high interest rates on loans. When there is no such risk, when we have such a low level of non-performing loans, banks really do not have an excuse not to give an appropriate interest rate on savings deposits. because some people want to save and they don't have other investment opportunities. And whenever we answer bank queries regarding the implementation of international standards relating to innovations, we tell them explicitly that we will not allow them to increase their margins, and to do this at the expense of reducing the interest rates on deposits of any kind, and especially on savings deposits. What is the methodology? What will be the nominal cap on interest rates? How they will be tied? To what they will be tied? We do have a solution, but we don't want to go out with it in public before we discuss this with banks. When you have mentioned that not many people are running a current account overdraft, so this number may be insignificant, but we are talking about human lives. And if someone is forced to have a current account overdraft, not for being exuberant or anything, but because he needs it. And when the interest rate on current account overdrafts is 43%, of course we have to curb it. Both authorized and unauthorized overdrafts are included. Banks have to provision funds for both authorized and unauthorized current account overdrafts. These are types of loans, and we want to address this issue systemically, both when it comes to authorized and unauthorized current account overdraft. But you have given me an opportunity to say something that I consider to be essential. When it comes to interest rate capping, we, after analyzing the examples by different countries, by type of loan, we concluded that for all citizens, a much greater problem is the price of square meter than the cost of loan. And when talking about merchant margins in retail trade, in wholesale trade, with intermediaries, I think that we have to open the vital question: is the only investment destination investing into bricks? Or should citizens be able to have other investment opportunities to deploy their surpluses into some other products? Because investing into buildings also entails costs, and we should address these costs too, not only the tax burden. If you are renting an apartment, you are also bearing some risks when it comes to maintenance, when it comes to regular payment of rents. So there should be some other investment opportunities which will enable citizens to earn, to make earnings with their money, not only by investing into apartments, which are really extortionate when it comes to Belgrade. And this is inadmissible. And if for intelligence services, square meters were much cheaper, then there is no justification for not using the same materials and the materials of the same quality to be charged at significantly higher prices. And this makes it difficult for citizens to take out a loan. It requires a greater down payment, and then the interest rate is higher. So we will address this issue, and I hope that this task force to be formed with regard to margins will also address this issue, whether the best investment opportunity is investing into apartments and into buying flats.
Business RS. We have covered the important questions. I'm interested in FDI. I saw the NBS data on half the annual cutoff information. We have a greater jump in FDI. So what is behind this increase if there was an unusual increase in the quantity of FDI between June and July? Have you seen anything? So this is one part of the question. The second part is we are on the way of fulfilling the tentative assessment that we will reach this target of FDI by the end of the year. And will you change your own estimate compared to the last year and 4.5 billion? So we do follow FDI at a level of at the 10-day level, and that's how we calculate this data. The precise figure is we have the figure of 2.8 billion. The precise figure is 2.793 million in July. So we saw a deceleration, and now we have an increase of 16% year on year. This does not mean that such a great discrepancy will remain until the end of the year. So we still stick to our old projection of 4.5 billion for the end of this year, but we hope it will be exceeded. And what speaks in favor of the FDI growth is what we're happy about. That is the expansion of the existing capacities, the reinvestment of earning achieved here. So we have no limitations when it comes to taking out the profit from dividends, financial institutions or other activities. But what we're happy about particularly is that the earned profit is reinvested in the expansion of production. And you can see that we have new facilities as well. We are following everything up to the smallest detail. So Sava, would you like to add something? I would just add something about the monthly dynamics. It depends on the dynamics of the projects and on the activation of projects. So when money enters a project, we have a huge number of projects active at each moment. Not only the greatest ones that we talk about in the media, but we have small projects up to 50 million euros, for instance. And it's very hard to plan precisely when the funds will arrive, and for example, at one period, 10 projects open up, and in other periods, many things depend on global factors. But we have had a steady path of FDI, and the increase has been continuous. Our projection is 4.5 billion for the end of this year. It is currently conservative because for 7 months our growth is 16% year on year, but we are cautious because some months may slow down and so on. And in this regard, some decline may take place. A few days ago, we had the announcement of a concrete investment of Hong Kong. It was covered by the media, so investment is always here. We can talk about the dynamics. So these investments are channeled mainly to tradable sectors. Up to 60% of all investment goes into tradable sectors, that is into industry, manufacturing, production, and we export these products, and we can see all this through the data. And I would also like to add, to be more precise, the following. When we say that data are preliminary, so these are the incoming funds that have been recorded through banks and submitted to us through reports, but we call them preliminary because according to the calendar of publication, we do not wait for it to be published in the next 1 month, but upon the expiry of the 10-day period, we get the aggregate data and we want to announce it. And we cannot have changes there. Perhaps some details may be different when it comes to the code for the particular investment, but I truly hope that our conservative projection will be exceeded, because before the concrete inflow recorded with the bank and before the distribution is made by crediting these inflows through the contracts on the FDI inflows, we already have an insight into what will be invested and to what extent. This does not mean, so these are the contracts whose implementation will take place this year or within a 2-year period and so on, but we have real expectations that FDI will continue at this pace, and that's why we claim that we are a safe investment destination. That's why we talk in this way about the fiscal deficit, its coverage, and everything else. Branislav Orošević, Bloomberg Adria. I have 2 questions. One relates to the baseline scenario of the inflation projection. Would the achievement of the baseline scenario when it comes to inflation and GDP, so where would be the key policy rate at the end of this year if the NBS publishes just like the Fed? The second question is to what extent does the NBS participate in the development of financial markets in Serbia, and what is the progress in this area? Nicola will answer the question about the financial markets, and before I pass the floor to Savo, I can also refer you to JP Morgan. JP Morgan mistakenly estimates our key policy rate. They expected us to cut the rate, but they were happy that we did not cut the key policy rate by 25 basis points, because we already announced one-off increases that we talked about in the inflation report. So we don't usually announce, although our key policy rate, it's not possible to achieve extra profit on our key policy rate because the markets are not developed to such an extent so as to be able to undertake financial activities that they would have some benefits from. Sava can say something about this. Yes, that's true. There is no projection of the key policy rate. It's not done in such a way. The model assumes all the assumptions and projects inflation, and the decisions on the rate also depend on other developments, current developments as well, especially in the current uncertain circumstances. You can see that the leading central banks do not announce their stance in this regard because it depends on the incoming data. The incoming data somehow determine the model outcome, so we cannot project the key policy rate in such a way. And when it comes to the other aspects, in addition to the baseline scenario, we also develop alternative scenarios. The text box 6 contains an explanation of the alternative scenarios as well.
Thank you for your question regarding the development of the financial market. The National Bank of Serbia, together with the Ministry of Finance, because these 2 institutions are the 2 key stakeholders in the process, and they're working on the development of the financial markets. We used to have a task force, a working group that was supposed to adopt the strategy for the development of the capital market. It rests on 2 pillars: the development of the bond market, of the sovereign bond market, as a huge number of investors is already investing into government securities, and we have made significant progress in this respect. The maturity of dinar securities has been lengthened. Liquidity in the secondary market is increasing. The entry and exit of international investors in the domestic market is free. There are no restrictions on dividend payments and on the taking out of profit and taking the profit out of the country. And we can see that both when it comes to dinar and euro securities, the liquidity has increased. The second pillar is the market of shares, and this is something that we will have to work on together with the Ministry of Finance and all other relevant stakeholders, such as the Securities Commission, the Central Securities Depository and Clearing House, and the Belgrade Stock Exchange. We are working on reviving the financial market through these two segments, the sovereign bond market, the corporate bond market, and in the second stage of the project, we should see some IPOs of solid companies. The aim of all this is to have solid foundations. We want good inflows. We want to enter the project with good examples of companies, because depending on the success of this initial phase, all other phases will depend on it. We have some potential investors, issuers of corporate bonds already, and in the coming period we will see some realization in this segment. So if there are no further questions, I would like to thank you for your attention and your patience. Thank you all.